The desert was loud that evening, not with music or laughter, but with the pounding of hooves and the sharp crack of rifles. The sun, low and burning red, stretched the shadows of riders across the dry earth like grasping hands. Dust rose in furious clouds behind the posse, and in front of them, stumbling, bleeding, and desperate, was a lone Comanche warrior. The outlaw they wanted wasn't white this time. He was darker-skinned, hair long and black, body painted with the markings of his people. He ran like a wounded wolf, every step jagged with pain. A bullet wound darkened his shirt, soaking into leather. Still, he ran, driven by something deeper than survival. Maybe pride, maybe sheer stubbornness. The men behind him shouted curses, spurred their horses harder, and raised their rifles. Don't let him get to the river. One of them barked. He's slowing, cut him off. Another answered, that, and he was slowing. Blood loss dragged at his legs, blurred his vision. The desert floor tilted under his feet. He staggered, fell to one knee, pushed himself up again, teeth clenched against the taste of dust and iron. The sound of hooves thundered closer. Far ahead, a lonely ranch house stood near the edge of a dry creek bed. Weathered boards, a tilting windmill, and a stubborn mule tied to a post. That was all. The woman who lived there was outside, dragging a bucket from the well. When she looked up and saw him, Clara Hayes froze. Her first thought was not again. Not another rider bringing death to her door. She had lived through raids before seeing commence. Shadows against firelight, heard the screams of neighbors, smelled the smoke of burning cabins. She had buried her husband, Will, after one of those nights. She had laid her boy in the earth not long after, taken by fever when she was left alone to nurse him. She knew the shape of grief, and she knew the face of fear. But the face stumbling toward her now wasn't fearsome. It was broken, desperate, and young. The warrior collapsed near her barn, dust puffing up around him. His hand clawed at the earth, dragging himself forward a few more inches before he went still. The sound of the posse was close now, shouting, galloping. Clara's heart hammered. She should leave him. Let them take him. Let the desert finish what it started. She had no reason to risk her neck for a stranger, much less one from a people. She had been taught to hate and fear, but something in her chest rebelled against that thought. She dropped the bucket. Water spilled into the dust, vanishing instantly. Her boots moved before her mind had finished arguing. She ran to him, crouched, and pressed her hands to his wound. Hot, sticky blood slicked her fingers. His breath was shallow, rattling. His eyes fluttered open, black as obsidian, locking with hers for a heartbeat. Help, he rasped. The posse was almost upon her. Clara heard the pounding hooves, the neigh of horses, the shouts. She dragged his body with all the strength left. In her arms, hauling him across the ground and into the shadow of her house. The mule brayed as if to betray her, tugging at its rope. She cursed under her breath. Hush, you stubborn beast. The warrior was heavy, muscles corded with strength even half dead. She gritted her teeth, pulling him through her doorway just as the first riders came into view down the slope. She shut the door fast, pressed her back against it, and listened to her own heartbeat thundering louder than the hooves outside. A moment later, fists pounded on the wood. Clara Hayes. It was Sheriff Murdoch's voice, gruff, self-important. A man who liked being in charge, liked being listened to. She swallowed, trying to steady her breath. Open up. We seen a savage come this way. Wounded. You see anything? Clara glanced behind her. The Comanche lay sprawled on her floor, blood soaking into her worn rug. His chest barely lifted with each breath. She grabbed a quilt, tossed it over him, and kicked his rifle under the table. Then she opened the door a crack. Murdoch sat tall on his horse, dust coating his beard. Behind him, Half a dozen men bristled with rifles and hard eyes. "Well?" he demanded. Clara leaned against the frame, forcing her face into weary calm. "I seen dust, Sheriff. Plenty of that out here. Haven't seen a man." Murdoch narrowed. His eyes. "Strange. Tracks led right up here." Clara shrugged. "Tracks lead all sorts of places. Desert wind plays tricks." One of the men spit. "Can we search her place?" Her blood went cold, but her voice stayed even. "You calling. Me a liar, Jed? You think I'd hide a Comanche in my parlor for company?" A ripple of laughter broke the tension for a moment, though not kindly. Still, it was enough. Murdoch scowled. "We'll be back, Clara. If you're lying, you'll hang same as him." She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You know where to find me." They wheeled their horses and thundered off again, dust swirling in their wake. Clara shut the door and sagged against it, her knees trembling. The warrior moaned softly under the quilt. Clara knelt beside him, pulling the cover back. His eyes fluttered open again, fever bright. She pressed a hand to his wound. "Fool thing I just did. You'd better not die on me after that." He didn't answer, drifting into unconsciousness. But before he slipped fully under, his lips moved. "Tahu," he whispered. Then he went still. Clara sat back, breathless, staring down at the man she had just risked her life to save. The room was silent, but for the tick of the clock on the mantel and the faint groan of the windmill outside. For a long while, she only sat there, listening to her heart pound. She thought of Will. She thought of their boy. She thought of fire and graves, and the way hate could turn a human face into a mask. And then she stood, squared her shoulders, and began tearing strips from an old sheet to bandage him. Because whatever tomorrow brought posse, death or worse, she had made her choice. The night stretched long and heavy across the plains. The lamp burned low in Clara's cabin, throwing pale yellow light over the rough-hewn walls, the weathered table, and the unmoving body sprawled on her rug. Outside, coyotes yipped at the rising moon. Clara Hayes sat on the floor with a rag in one hand and a bowl of water in the other. She dipped the rag, wrung it out, and pressed it to the wound in the Comanche's side. His skin was hot to the touch, fever thrumming through him. She had boiled her last scrap of whiskey to clean the wound, though she wasn't sure if it would do more good than harm. "Lord above," she muttered, pushing sweat-stuck hair back from her forehead. "If I'm not the biggest fool in the territory." Every so often, she'd glance at the door, half expecting Sheriff Murdoch to come pounding again. She could almost hear his voice in her head, mocking. "Harboring a savage, Clara? Risking your neck for one of them after what they did to Will." She flinched at the thought. Her husband's face rose, unbidden steady eyes, calloused hands, the smell of leather and dust clinging to him. She remembered the day he never came back from a skirmish near the Brazos. Remembered digging the grave herself with blistered hands. Her jaw clenched, and yet she didn't stop binding the stranger's wound. The Comanche stirred. His chest rose shallow, rattling. Then he coughed, eyes cracking open. For a moment, his gaze darted wildly around the room, pupils sharp as a hawk's. His hand jerked toward his side, where his knife should have been. But Clara's shotgun was already in her lap. "Don't try it," she said evenly, her finger brushing the trigger. His hand froze in the air. His breathing was ragged, but his lips pulled into the faintest shadow of a grin. "You? Afraid?" His English was halting, rough-edged, but the word cut clear. Clara kept her eyes locked on him. "I'd be a fool not to be." For a long beat, they stared at each other. Then slowly, carefully, he lowered his hand back to his side. "You saved," he whispered. His voice cracked like dry earth. "Why?" Clara blinked. She didn't know the answer herself. She thought of Will, of her boy, of the life she had tried to build alone on this barren land. "I couldn't just let them take you," she said. At last, her voice sounded too soft, even to her. His eyes closed again, but a single word drifted from his lips. "Tahu." "I know," Clara murmured. "You told me." Hours dragged on. Clara kept changing the bandage, feeding him water in tiny sips when he could swallow. His fever raged, then broke for a while, then returned hotter. Sometimes he muttered in his own tongue, words Clara couldn't understand. Other times he looked at her with a strange calm that unsettled her. Near midnight, the mule brayed outside. Clara jumped, heart pounding. She hurried to the window and peeked through the curtain. The yard was empty. Just the moonlight casting long silver shadows across the scrub. No riders, no sheriff, no posse. Just silence. She exhaled slowly. "Get a hold of yourself, woman." When she turned back, Tahu was watching her, his dark eyes reflecting the lamplight. "They hunt me," he said, each word careful. "I know," Clara replied. "Not for crime. For fear." Clara's brows knit. "Sheriff Murdoch says you're a murderer." Tahu coughed, shaking his head. "I kill. No women. No children. I take. No cattle. I fight only men who bring war." His gaze fixed on her with a weight that made her throat tighten. "But they say savage. They want reason to kill." Clara didn't answer. Deep down, she suspected he was telling the truth. Murdoch never needed much excuse to rouse men to violence. He had called her weak for not remarrying, had mocked her for keeping the ranch after Will's death. She knew the kind of man he was. Still, hearing it from Tahu's mouth unsettled her. She sat back against the wall, shotgun across her lap, and sighed. "Maybe we both just did foolish things today." For the first time, the faintest chuckle escaped Tahu's throat, a broken, dry laugh that turned into a cough. Clara couldn't help but snort softly in return. The absurdity of it her, a ranch widow, laughing with a half-dead Comanche lying on her floor, would have been unimaginable just yesterday. The night stretched on. Clara dozed fitfully in her chair. Once, she dreamed she heard her boy's voice, calling "Mama," and woke with tears burning her eyes. She looked at the man on her floor, enemy, stranger, survivor, and whispered to herself, "You don't get to take another child, God. Not tonight." By dawn, Tahu was breathing steadier. His fever had cooled a little. Clara stepped out onto the porch, pulling her shawl tight against the morning chill. The desert stretched wide and empty under the first rays of sun. For a moment, it was quiet. Enough to believe maybe she had escaped danger. Then she saw them. On the horizon, black shapes dotted the ridgeline. Riders. Dozens of them. Her mouth went dry. They came slowly, steadily, until the full sight of them filled her vision. Comanche. Warriors mounted on lean ponies, their feathers and paint bright against the rising sun. They moved with silence and precision, surrounding her land like a tightening noose. The mule brayed again, restless. Clara's breath came fast. She stepped back into the house, slammed the door, and pressed her back against it. Tahu's eyes opened instantly. He looked at her, then toward the window, and the faintest smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "My people?" he said. Clara's stomach dropped. She grabbed her shotgun, fingers trembling. "Your people? They've surrounded my house." His gaze didn't waver. "Because you saved me. Now, they will come for you?" Clara's breath came short and sharp as the shadows of mounted warriors fell across her yard. Her house, her land, her whole fragile world stood in their hands now. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if saving one man's life would cost her her own. The morning sun climbed higher, spilling gold across the prairie. but Clara felt only the chill of dread. Outside her windows, shadows moved horses, feathers, painted faces. The Comanche had closed in, a silent wall of riders circling her little ranch like wolves around a wounded deer, her fingers clenched tighter on the shotgun. Every creak of the floorboards seemed too loud, every breath a risk. She had hidden one Comanche last night. Now she had an army staring her down. Thu sat propped against the wall, pale but steady-eyed. His wounds had drained the strength from his body, but not the fire from his gaze. When he spoke, his voice was low and firm. "Do not fear." Clara turned on him, voice sharp with panic. "Don't fear? Your people are out there, surrounding me like I'm next to hang. You think they'll spare me because I dragged you into my parlor?" Tahu's lips pressed thin, but there was no anger. In his eyes, "They came because you chose mercy. They come to see if you still stand by it." Clara's heart hammered in her chest. She glanced toward the window again, where the first warrior now sat motionless on horseback, staring straight at her door. "They don't look much like they're here to thank me," she muttered. A sharp knock rattled her door. Clara jumped. Voice spoke outside, deep and commanding, laced with authority. Not English Comanche words, flowing like wind through stone. Clara didn't understand a single one, but she understood tone. It was the voice of a man who expected to be obeyed. Tahu's dark eyes found hers. "Chief Red Hawk, he is my uncle." Clara's knees went weak. She gripped the doorframe to keep steady. "What do they want?" Tahu inhaled slowly, grimacing at the pain in his side. "To see if you are true or false. If you saved me for mercy, or to betray." Clara stared at the door. Memories flickered through her mind like flashes of lightning. At graves she dug. The nights she sat with a shotgun across her lap, praying the shadows outside her cabin wouldn't move. The bitterness that had lived in her bones ever since. And yet, here she stood, hiding one of those shadows inside her house. She swallowed hard, set her jaw, and opened the door. Sunlight spilled in. Clara raised a hand against the glare and found herself facing a wall of horses. At their center sat Red Hawk, an older warrior, broad-shouldered, his face lined but strong, painted with red streaks that caught the light. His eyes were sharp, dark, and piercing, as though they could strip away lies with a glance. Around him 20 warriors sat silent, weapons resting but ready. Their ponies stamped and snorted, but no man moved. The air was thick, brittle with waiting. Red Hawk's gaze fixed on her. He spoke again in Comanche. Clara's stomach twisted. She understood nothing. Tahu's voice called from behind her, weak but steady, answering in the same tongue. Words rippled back and forth between them. Clara's heart thudded as she tried to read their faces. Red Hawk's eyes narrowed, then softened slightly. Finally, he addressed her directly in broken English. "White woman, you hide Tahu?" Clara's mouth was dry as desert sand. "Yes. You save him?" Her grip on the shotgun tightened. She nodded. "I did." Red Hawk studied her a long moment. The silence stretched, broken only by the creak of saddles and the restless shuffle of hooves. And he spoke again. "You risk your life. Why?" The question cut straight through her, deeper than she expected. She swallowed, fighting the quiver in her voice. "Because." She hesitated, then forced herself to go on. "Because I'm tired of graves, my husband, my boy. This land takes too much already. I couldn't let it take another." For the first time, something flickered in Red Hawk's eyes, a glimmer of understanding, perhaps even respect. But before the moment could settle, the thunder of new hooves split the air. Clara's blood turned to ice. She knew that sound. Posse. She spun toward the ridgeline. Dust rose in the distance, sunlight flashing off rifle barrels. Sheriff Murdoch led them, his horse kicking up dirt as he raised a hand to signal halt dot in seconds. The open plain around her house was a battlefield of Glaire's posse on one side, Comanche warriors on the other, and Clara's little ranch stuck like tinder between two sparks. Murdoch's voice rang out, full of smug triumph. "Well, well. Look at this. Knew you were hiding something, Clara. Looks like the whole nest of them came crawling to your door." He raised his rifle. His men followed suit, barrels gleaming. Red Hawk's warriors tensed, bows drawn, muskets lifted. The air trembled on the edge of violence. Clara's chest tightened. She felt the weight of the shotgun in her hands, but it might as well have been a twig in a hurricane. Murdoch's sneer widened. "Step aside, Clara. You hand that savage over, and maybe we let you keep your skin." Red Hawk barked something, in Comanche, sharp as a whip crack. His men leaned forward, horses snorting, ready to strike. Tahu struggled to rise inside the cabin, bracing himself on the table, voice hoarse but fierce. "Clara, stand strong." Her pulse roared in her ears. She looked from one side to the other, the posse's pale faces twisted with hate, the Comanche's painted warriors waiting like coiled springs. And she realized the truth. The choice wasn't about Tahu anymore. It was about her, about who Clara Hayes would be in the ashes of everything she had lost. Her fear broke like glass. She stepped forward, shotgun raised, and planted herself in the dust between both sides. Her voice was steady, carrying across the plain. "You'll not take him, not while I'm standing." Murdoch's eyes went wide with fury. He spat in the dirt. "You've lost your damn mind, woman." He swung his rifle toward her. "Then you die with them." Behind her, Red Hawk's warriors shouted, horses lunging, weapons snapping into readiness. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. And then the standoff shattered into fire. The first shot cracked through the silence. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Smoke and dust swallowed the ranch as the gunfight erupted. And Clara Hayes stood in the middle, shotgun blazing, heart hammering, choosing her side once and for all. The crack of the first rifle shot split the morning like lightning. Horses screamed. The sharp twang of bowstrings followed, arrows hissing through the air. Smoke bloomed in the sunlight as guns fired from both sides, and Clara Hayes's ranch became the heart of a storm. She flinched as a bullet shattered the porch beam above her head, showering splinters. Her heart pounded like a drum in her chest, but her hands were steady as she raised her shotgun. The world narrowed to fragments. Murdoch's men shouting, Red Hawk's warriors answering. A horse rearing, throwing its rider into the dust. Clara fired the recoil, slamming her shoulder as one of the posse's rifles dropped into the dirt. She didn't wait to see if the man fell. She ducked, reloaded, and fired again. For years she had lived in fear, waiting behind shutters, clutching a gun in the dark. Now, standing in the dust, smoke burning her lungs, she felt something new. Not fear, not hate, but defiance. Inside the cabin, Tahu dragged himself upright, racing on the table, blood seeping through fresh bandages. His voice cut through the chaos. "Clara barn," she turned. Smoke was curling from the barn's roof. A stray lantern, knocked over in the frenzy, had caught dry hay. Flames licked higher with the wind, devouring the only shelter for her mule. The last place Will had worked before he died. No, Clara sprinted across the yard, dodging a bullet that kicked up dirt inches from her boots. She flung the barn doors wide, coughing as smoke poured out. The mule screamed in panic, thrashing at its tether. Clara rushed forward, cutting the rope with her knife, slapping its flank. "Go! Run, you stubborn beast!" The mule bolted into the dust, hooves pounding. Behind her, The roof groaned as fire chewed through the beams. Clara staggered out, hair singed, lungs burning. The barn collapsed with a roar of sparks, smoke blotting out the sun. The battle raged. Murdoch's men pressed forward, rifles spitting fire, but the Comanche held the line with swift, fierce strikes. Arrows cut the air, finding gaps between rifles. The yard became a churn of hoofprints, smoke, and blood. Murdoch's voice rose. Above the chaos, bellowing, "Kill them all. Burn the house if you have to." Clara's blood iced. Her house, the last piece of her life, stood behind her, fragile against the fire. Rage surged through her veins, white-hot. She raised her shotgun, sighted Murdoch's broad figure on horseback, and fired. The blast struck his arm. He roared, clutching the wound, his horse bucking. He cursed her name with venom, hatred twisting his face. "You'll hang for this, Clara Hayes." She shouted back, her voice raw. Better to hang with courage than live as a coward. Through the haze, Red Hawk rode forward, his presence like iron. He shouted in Comanche, rallying his men. Tahu, staggering from the cabin with a rifle clenched tight, leaned against the doorway, but stood tall enough for his warriors to see. His voice carried, strong despite the blood in his throat. "They fight with us," he called, pointing to Clara. The white woman chose. A cheer rose from the Comanche line. Their charge grew fiercer, arrows and bullets flying in a storm that broke the posse's advance. Murdoch's men faltered. Smoke choked their lungs, horses panicked, and the Comanche pressed harder. Clara reloaded again and again, her arms bruised. From recoil, her ears ringing. At one point, she nearly slipped on blood-slicked dirt, but Tahu's hand shot out to steady her. Their eyes met for a brief, breathless moment. He gave a faint nod, warrior to warrior, survivor to survivor. Clara nodded back. Then they both turned and fired into the fray dot at last. The posse broke. Men scrambled onto their horses, dragging their wounded, curses spilling into the wind. Murdoch, pale with rage and blood loss, glared one last time across the smoke. "This ain't over." He spat, then wheeled his horse and fled with the rest. The thunder of retreating hooves faded across the plain. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the dying barn fire and the ragged breaths of men and horses. Clara stood in the dust, shotgun limp in her hands, smoke curling from the blackened ruins of her barn. Her knees nearly gave out. She had no barn. Her mule was gone, her field scorched with hoofprints, her porch splintered with bullet holes. And yet her heart was beating, steady and strong. She looked around. Red Hawk sat tall on his horse, watching her with unreadable eyes. Then, slowly, he raised his hand in a gesture of respect. His warriors echoed it, silent and solemn. Tahu limped forward, leaning on his rifle, and placed a hand on her shoulder. His voice was low but steady. "You are not weak, you are strong like storm." Clara let out a shaky laugh, half tears, half relief. Storm or fool, I can't tell anymore. But deep inside, she knew. She had made her choice. That evening, the Comanche rode away into the red horizon, Tahu among them, carried on a litter. But alive. Before he left, he turned back once, his dark eyes catching hers across the fading light. No words were spoken, but none were needed. Clara stood alone on her porch, staring at the smoking ruin of her barn, the scarred earth, the empty horizon. Alone, yet not the same woman who had opened her door yesterday. She had chosen mercy over hate, courage over fear. And though the land would demand more from her tomorrow, she knew one thing with certainty. She would no longer face it with a bowed head. The Wild West was built on choices, some carved in steel, some written in blood. Clara Hayes chose mercy, and that choice set her free. Out here, where the desert remembers every drop of sweat and every echo of gunfire. It isn't the strongest who survive. It's the ones brave enough to stand for what's right. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes a single act of courage can change the course of everything.